The champagne glass slipped from my hand, catching on the edge of the marble countertop before I could steady it. Around me, 30 women in designer dresses laughed at something my son's fiancée had just said, their voices blending into that particular sound wealthy people make when they're feeling superior. But I wasn't listening to the joke. I was watching Vanessa's face as her best friend, Madison, turned to me with a confused smile and said, "Excuse me, could you bring out more of those little crab cakes? They're absolutely divine." The room went quiet for just a moment. Long enough for Vanessa to correct the mistake, long enough to say, "Oh no, this is my future mother-in-law, Catherine." But Vanessa just smiled that practiced society smile. I'd watched her perfect over the past 6 months and said, "Of course, the kitchen is just through there. And while you're at it, we're running low on champagne. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button." I'm Catherine Mitchell, and at 63 years old, I thought I'd experienced every possible variation of being invisible. I was wrong. Standing in that penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, surrounded by women who measured human worth in carats and zip codes, I realized my son had fallen in love with exactly the kind of person I'd spent a lifetime proving wrong. Michael had met Vanessa Chen 8 months ago at some networking event for young professionals. She was 32, stunning in that effortless way that comes from good genes and better stylists, and came from what everyone kept calling old money. Her father, Richard Chen, owned Chen Properties, a boutique real estate development firm that specialized in luxury condos and upscale retail spaces. Vanessa herself worked as a marketing consultant, though from what I could tell, her main job was looking beautiful at charity galas and posting about her lifestyle on social media. Catherine works in property management, Michael had explained during our first dinner together, his tone apologetic in a way that made my chest tight. She's been doing it for, what, Mom? 30 years? 35? I'd corrected gently, watching Vanessa's mother, Linda, nod with the kind of polite disinterest reserved for people discussing their housekeepers. "How lovely," Linda had said, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she reached for her wine. "Property management must be so rewarding. All those grateful tenants." What none of them knew, what Michael himself didn't fully understand, was what property management actually meant in my case. But I'd learned a long time ago that people hear what they expect to hear, and wealthy families expected that a single mother who raised her son alone while working multiple jobs must still be scraping by, even in her 60s. Now, standing in Vanessa's childhood home, watching her friends and family celebrate a wedding that was 4 months away, I decided it was time for some expectations to change. I picked up the champagne glass I'd almost dropped and set it carefully on the counter. Then I walked through the crowd of designer dresses and expensive perfume, straight to where Vanessa stood, holding court with her bridesmaids. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need to step out for a bit. Family emergency." Vanessa barely glanced at me. "Oh, sure. Thanks for coming. And actually, before you go, could you grab someone from the catering company? We need to talk to them about the setup for the gift table." I could have corrected her right then. Could have explained that I wasn't the help, that I was her future mother-in-law, that the casual dismissal was inappropriate and hurtful. But I'd learned something important over 35 years of building my empire from nothing. Sometimes the best response to disrespect isn't confrontation. It's consequences. "Of course," I said with my best service industry smile. "I'll take care of it right away." 20 minutes later, I was in my car, stuck in Chicago traffic, and on the phone with my property manager, James Rodriguez. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have to say, this seems a bit extreme. James, how long have you worked for me?" 12 years. "And in those 12 years, have I ever made a business decision based on emotion?" There was a pause. "No, ma'am. You're the most level-headed person I know." "Then trust me when I say this isn't about emotion. It's about market correction. The Chen Properties lease on the River North location comes up for renewal next month, correct?" "Yes, but Mrs. Mitchell, they've been good tenants for 5 years. And their rent is already below market rate because we wanted to maintain the relationship." "Exactly. So let's correct that. Send them a renewal offer at current market rate. That's $12,000 a month instead of $7,000, if I recall correctly. That's a 70% increase. They'll never agree to that. Then they'll have 60 days to vacate." Either way, James, it's just business. Nothing personal. Except it was personal. Deeply, painfully personal. Because I'd spent 35 years being invisible to people like the Chens, and I was done pretending it didn't matter. I spent Sunday morning doing what I always did after making a major business decision, reviewing the numbers and making sure my emotions hadn't clouded my judgment. The Chen Properties portfolio was impressive on the surface, but the truth was more complicated. They owned 5 properties in the Chicago area, all mortgaged to the hilt, and their cash flow depended on maintaining current rental income from their own tenants. What they didn't know was that I owned the building they rented for their flagship office. They'd been dealing with Riverside Property Management for 5 years, never realizing that Riverside was just one of 15 management companies. I used to keep my real estate holdings private. My phone rang at 10:30. Michael, Mom, we need to talk. Of course, sweetheart. How was the bridal shower? I kept my voice neutral, curious to hear his version of events. It was great. Vanessa's friends are really wonderful, very welcoming. He paused. Mom, I need to ask you something. Did something happen yesterday? Vanessa said you left early because of a family emergency. I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, at the buildings I owned that nobody knew about, at the empire I'd built while people assumed I was barely getting by. Nothing important, honey. Just some business I needed to handle. Business? Mom? It was Saturday evening. What kind of business? Michael, do you remember when you were 12 and those boys at school made fun of you for wearing hand-me-down sneakers? What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what I told you? He was quiet for a moment. You said that people who measure others by their possessions are measuring themselves by the wrong standards. Exactly. And I also said that someday you'd be successful enough that those boys would be begging for your attention. Mom, you're being weird. Are you okay? I'm fine, sweetheart. Actually, I'm better than fine. I'll talk to you later this week. After I hung up, I pulled out the file James had compiled on Chen Properties. It made for interesting reading. Richard Chen had expanded too aggressively during the pandemic, betting on a commercial real estate recovery that had been slower than expected. 2 of his properties were struggling to maintain occupancy, and his debt service was eating into profits faster than he could raise rents. Losing their River North office space would be more than inconvenient. It would be catastrophic. By Monday afternoon, James called with news I'd been expecting. Mrs. Mitchell. I received a very angry phone call from Richard Chen. He's demanding to speak with the property owner about the rent increase. And what did you tell him? That the owner is a private individual who doesn't take meetings about standard lease renewals. He threatened to sue for wrongful eviction. On what grounds? We're offering him a renewal at market rate. That's not wrongful. That's capitalism. He also said, and I quote, "My daughter is marrying into a family of property managers. Maybe they can teach you something about maintaining good tenant relationships." I smiled despite myself. The irony was delicious. James, set up a meeting for Wednesday. Tell Mr. Chen that the property owner has reconsidered and would like to discuss the situation in person. You're going to meet with him yourself? I think it's time. Don't you? Wednesday morning arrived bright and cold. One of those October days in Chicago when the wind off Lake Michigan reminds you that winter is coming, whether you're ready or not. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Richard Chen, a simple navy suit from Nordstrom Rack, my grandmother's pearl earrings, and the confidence that comes from owning $15 million in Chicago real estate that nobody knows about. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the River North property itself, in the very conference room that Chen Properties had been using for client meetings for 5 years. James met me in the lobby with a look that was half concern, half admiration. Mrs. Mitchell, I have to ask one more time. Are you sure about this? James, how many properties do I own? 15 apartment buildings, 2 commercial spaces, and a parking garage. Roughly 350 units total. And how much debt do I carry? None. Everything's paid off. And how did I accomplish that? He smiled. By making smart business decisions and never letting people underestimate you. Exactly. So trust me on this one. Richard Chen arrived exactly on time, which I appreciated. He was in his late 50s, dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the stress in his shoulders. His wife, Linda, was with him, and I recognized the calculated elegance from our first dinner together. They expected to meet with some faceless corporate entity. Instead, they got me, sitting at the head of the conference table with a folder of documents and a smile. "Catherine?" Richard's confusion was almost comical. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Richard." "Linda, please, sit down." "I don't understand," Linda said, but she was already sinking into a chair, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. "Where's the property owner?" "You're looking at her." The silence that followed was profound. I watched understanding dawn on their faces, followed immediately by disbelief, then anger, then fear. It was fascinating, really, watching people recalibrate their entire perception of reality in real time. "That's impossible," Richard said finally. "This building is owned by Riverside Property Management." Riverside Property Management is a company I created 35 years ago to manage my holdings. This building is one of 15 properties I own in Chicago. Well, 14 apartment buildings and 2 commercial spaces, to be precise. "You're lying." But Linda's voice shook when she said it. I opened the folder and slid the documents across the table. Property deeds, tax records, incorporation papers, all bearing my name or my company's name. Richard picked them up with trembling hands, and I watched his face as he processed what he was reading. "I don't understand," he said again. "Michael said you worked in property management. We thought you were a building manager or something." "I do work in property management. I manage my properties. It's just that nobody ever asked which side of the landlord-tenant relationship I was on." "Why didn't you tell us?" Linda's voice was sharp with accusation and something else that sounded like panic. "Because people hear what they expect to hear. You expected Michael's mother to be poor, struggling, barely making ends meet. So that's what you saw, even though the evidence suggested otherwise." Richard set down the documents and looked at me with something approaching respect. "Okay, I'll admit I underestimated you. We underestimated you. But this rent increase is still unreasonable. It's vindictive. It's market rate. I've been subsidizing your rent for 5 years because I wanted to maintain a good relationship with long-term tenants, but I've recently reconsidered the value of that relationship. This is about Saturday, isn't it?" Linda's face had gone pale. "About the bridal shower. This is about business, Linda. Nothing more, nothing less." "Vanessa said you left early," Linda continued, her voice rising. "She said there was a family emergency. I don't understand what that has to do with our lease." I leaned back in my chair and looked at these 2 people who had dismissed me so casually at our first meeting, who had smiled politely while mentally calculating how much financial help they'd need to give Michael to compensate for his poor family background. "Let me tell you a story," I said. 35 years ago, I was a 28-year-old single mother with a 6-month-old baby and no college degree. My husband had died in a car accident, and his life insurance barely covered the funeral. I worked 3 jobs: waitressing, cleaning offices at night, and doing bookkeeping for a small property management company. Do you know what I learned from that last job? They shook their heads. I learned that the only real security in this world is ownership. So I saved every penny, lived in a studio apartment, bought day-old bread, wore thrift store clothes, and put Michael in subsidized daycare while I worked. After 5 years, I had enough for a down payment on a small apartment building in a rough neighborhood. 3 units, constantly breaking down, terrible tenants. But it was mine. I paused, remembering those early years, the exhaustion, the fear, the determination. I fixed it up myself, learned plumbing, electrical work, basic carpentry, raised the rents gradually as I improved the property, sold it after 3 years for twice what I paid, bought 2 buildings with the profit, then 4, then 8. I never took on debt I couldn't service, never overextended, never bet more than I could afford to lose. And I never, ever told anyone what I was building, because I learned that people treat you very differently when they think you're poor versus when they know you're wealthy. That's very impressive, Richard said carefully. But I still don't see what this has to do with our lease situation. It has everything to do with it. You see, Richard, you built your empire on leverage and debt, and the assumption that property values would always rise. I built mine on caution and patience, and the knowledge that nothing is guaranteed. Your business model requires everything to go right. Mine can survive when things go wrong. And right now, Things are going wrong for you, aren't they? Richard's jaw tightened. Our business is fine. Your business is drowning. 2 of your properties are operating at 70% occupancy when you need 85% to break even. Your debt service is eating 90% of your gross income, and you're 6 months away from defaulting on at least one of your mortgages. How do you know that? The fear in Linda's voice was unmistakable now. Because I do my homework. Always have. It's why I'm successful. Richard stood up abruptly. This is blackmail. You're using our financial situation to punish us because your feelings got hurt at a party. Sit down, Richard. Something in my voice made him comply. This isn't blackmail. This is a business decision. You can either pay market rate for prime, River North office space, or you can vacate and find something cheaper. Those are your options. The fact that one of those options will likely bankrupt your company isn't my problem to solve. You'd destroy our business because Vanessa's friends mistook you for catering staff? Linda was crying now, mascara running down her perfectly made-up face. That's insane. No, I said quietly. I'd destroy your business because your daughter, knowing full well who I was, deliberately let that mistake stand, because she found it amusing to watch her future mother-in-law be treated like a servant, because in that moment, she revealed exactly how she sees me, and, by extension, how she sees my son, as someone beneath her, someone she's graciously allowing into her family, someone whose feelings don't matter as long as they don't interfere with her perfect, Instagram-ready life. The truth hung in the air between us. Linda sobbed openly now, and Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. What do you want from us? Richard asked finally. I want Vanessa to understand that every action has consequences. I want her to learn that the way you treat people matters, especially when you think those people can't hurt you. And I want my son to see who he's really marrying before it's too late. And if Vanessa apologizes, if we all apologize, then we can discuss a more reasonable rent increase. Maybe something that gives you time to stabilize your business. Maybe even some advice on how to restructure your debt load. I've been doing this for 35 years. After all, I know a thing or two about making properties profitable. Why would you help us after everything you just said? I thought about that question. About Michael's happiness? About the wedding that was 4 months away? About the grandchildren I hope to have someday? Because despite everything, I love my son. And he loves Vanessa. And I'd rather teach her to be better than watch my son marry someone who treats people like they're disposable. But as I walked out of that conference room, I didn't know that Richard and Linda would go straight to Vanessa with a very different version of our conversation. Or that by Thursday evening, my phone would be ringing with my son's voice, angrier than I'd ever heard it. Mom, what the hell did you do? I was in my living room, the modest 2-bedroom condo I'd bought 15 years ago, in a nice but not ostentatious building, reviewing financial reports for my properties. The condo had always been enough for me, even though I could afford something 10 times as expensive. Old habits die hard. Hello, Michael. I take it you spoke with Vanessa? I spoke with her parents. They said you threatened to destroy their business, that you're trying to extort them using some buildings you claim to own. Mom, this is insane. I don't even know who you are right now. The pain in his voice cut deeper than I'd expected. I'd raised this boy alone, sacrificed everything for him, and now he was choosing to believe the worst about me without even asking for my side of the story. Did you ask them why we were having that conversation in the first place? They said something about a misunderstanding at the bridal shower, that Vanessa's friend didn't recognize you and you took it personally. Is that what they said happened? Mom, I don't have time for games. Vanessa is devastated. Her parents are talking about selling their business, and you're sitting there acting like this is all some kind of lesson. It's cruel. Michael, do you know what I do for a living? I mean, really do. Not what you tell people at dinner parties. You work in property management. I know that. I own Riverside Property Management, and Lakefront Holdings, and Chicago Metro Properties. 15 companies total, managing 350 units across Chicago. I'm worth roughly $15 million, Michael. Have been for the last decade. The silence on the other end of the phone was absolute. That's not funny, Mom. It's not a joke. I've been building this empire since before you were born. Every sacrifice I made, every extra shift I worked, every time I said we couldn't afford something you wanted, it was all going toward this. toward security, toward making sure you'd never have to struggle the way I did. If that's true, why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't want money to define our relationship. I didn't want you to grow up entitled, expecting things to be handed to you. I wanted you to understand the value of work, of education, of building something yourself. And you did, Michael. You became a software engineer through your own merit, your own talent. I'm so proud of that. So you've just been lying to me my whole life? I've been protecting you. There's a difference. And now? What's this really about, Mom? Because if you actually own the building the Chens rent, and you're actually threatening to destroy their business, that makes you the villain in this story. I closed my eyes, feeling every one of my 63 years. Michael, what happened at the bridal shower? I don't know. I wasn't there, but Vanessa said her friend made an honest mistake and you overreacted. Her friend asked me to bring out more crab cakes, assumed I was the catering staff, and Vanessa, knowing full well who I was, told me to get more champagne from the kitchen. The silence again, longer this time. That can't be right. Vanessa wouldn't do that. Ask her yourself. Better yet, ask Madison. Or any of the 30 other women who were there. They all watched it happen, Michael. They all laughed. Even if that's true, it doesn't justify what you're doing to her family, doesn't it? Because here's what I learned about the Chen family business while doing my due diligence. They're not the successful real estate moguls they pretend to be. They're drowning in debt, over-leveraged on properties that aren't performing, and about 6 months away from bankruptcy. The only thing keeping them afloat is below-market rents on their office space, which I've been subsidizing out of goodwill. So you're going to kick them when they're down? I'm going to stop subsidizing people who treat me like garbage. There's a difference. Michael's voice, when he spoke again, was cold in a way I'd never heard before. If you go through with this, if you destroy Vanessa's family business to prove some point about respect, then I don't want your money. I don't want anything from you. We'll uninvite you from the wedding, and you can live alone in your secret empire, Mom. I'm sure that'll make you very happy. He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my living room, surrounded by furniture I'd bought at estate sales and thrift stores, looking at financial statements that proved I'd succeeded beyond my wildest dreams, and felt more alone than I had since the night Michael's father died. But then my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Mitchell? This is Vanessa. I think we need to talk. Friday afternoon found me in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, far enough from both my neighborhood and the Chens that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. Vanessa arrived 10 minutes late, which I recognized as a power play even as I acknowledged it by standing when she approached. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, though her tone suggested she was doing me a favor rather than the other way around. "Of course. Would you like something to drink?" "I'm fine." We sat across from each other, and I took the opportunity to really look at my son's fiancée. She was beautiful, obviously, with that particular kind of polished perfection that money buys. But up close, I could see the stress around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't the confident woman from the bridal shower. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you to stop whatever it is you're doing to my parents' business." "I'm not doing anything to their business. I'm simply adjusting their rent to market rate." "That's not what they said. They said you threatened them, that you told them you'd destroy them if I didn't apologize for some imagined slight." "Is that what happened at the bridal shower? An imagined slight?" Vanessa had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Madison made a mistake. She didn't know who you were. And when she made that mistake, what did you say?" "I don't remember exactly." "I do. You told me to get more champagne from the kitchen, in front of 30 people who all knew I was your future mother-in-law. It was a joke. Was it funny?" Vanessa looked away. "Look, I'm sorry if your feelings were hurt, but this is way out of proportion. My parents could lose everything because of your ego. Your parents are going to lose everything because they made bad business decisions. I'm just not subsidizing those decisions anymore. That's not fair." "Fair?" I leaned forward. "Vanessa, let me tell you what's not fair. It's not fair that I worked 3 jobs for 20 years to give my son a good life while people like your family measured my worth by my zip code. It's not fair that I built a successful business empire while hiding it because I knew people would treat me differently if they knew I was wealthy. And it's not fair that my son's fiancée thinks so little of me that she found it amusing to let her friends treat me like a servant." I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. My whole life, everyone's known who my family is, what we have, where we came from. And it's been this thing, like people are either impressed or intimidated or trying to get something from us. When Michael told me his mom worked in property management, I just assumed. I thought it would be nice to have in-laws who were normal, regular, not part of all the society stuff my parents care about. So you decided I was poor. I decided you weren't rich. And yeah, maybe I was a little relieved about that, because it meant Michael chose me for me, not for my family's connections or money. And at the bridal shower, she looked at me with something like shame. Madison's always been kind of a snob. She makes comments about people who aren't in our circle. Usually I just ignore it, but that day, I don't know. I was stressed about the wedding, about my parents being weird about money lately, about Michael spending so much time at work. And when Madison made that mistake, there was this moment where I could have corrected her, but I just didn't. And then it was too late, and everyone was laughing, and I just went with it. You humiliated me to entertain your friends. I didn't think about it like that. You were just there, and it was easier to let them think what they wanted than to make a thing about it. I looked at this young woman who was going to marry my son, who would be the mother of my grandchildren, who I'd have to share holidays and family dinners with for the rest of my life, and I tried to find something redeemable in her honesty. Vanessa, can I ask you something? If our situations were reversed, if Michael's family was the wealthy one and yours was struggling, would you want to be treated the way you treated me? No, she said quietly. I wouldn't. Then why did you think it was acceptable to treat me that way? Because I didn't think you'd care. I thought you'd be too focused on being part of the wedding to notice. Being part of the wedding? Vanessa, I'm Michael's mother. I'm not some supporting character in your Instagram story. I'm a person with feelings and dignity and a lifetime of experiences that made me who I am. Tears started rolling down Vanessa's perfect cheeks, smudging her expensive makeup. My parents are going to lose everything. The business my grandfather built, our family legacy. And it's my fault because I was too shallow and stupid to treat you with basic respect. I pulled a tissue from my purse and handed it across the table. Vanessa, your parents aren't losing everything because of you. They're in trouble because your father overextended during the pandemic and hasn't been able to recover. The rent increase is just accelerating an inevitable collapse. So you are trying to destroy them. No. I'm trying to teach all of you an important lesson about consequences. But I'm also a businesswoman, and I don't make decisions based purely on emotion. What does that mean? I pulled out another folder, this one containing a proposal I'd had James prepare the night before. This is a restructuring plan for Chen Properties. It involves selling 2 of your underperforming properties to pay down debt, refinancing the remaining 3 with better terms, and moving your office to a smaller space I own in Wicker Park at a rate you can actually afford. If implemented correctly, it would stabilize your parents' business within 6 months. Vanessa stared at the documents like they might bite her. Why would you help us after everything? Because I love my son, and he loves you, and because everybody deserves a second chance, even people who make terrible first impressions. I paused. But this help comes with conditions. What kind of conditions? First, you apologize to me. Not because I'm forcing you to, but because you genuinely understand why what you did was wrong. Second, you tell Michael the truth about what happened at the bridal shower. All of it, including what you just told me about why you did it. Third, we all sit down together as a family and have an honest conversation about money, expectations, and how we're going to treat each other going forward. And if I don't agree, then I proceed with the rent increase, your parents' business fails, and you get to explain to Michael why his mother wasn't at your wedding. Your choice. Vanessa wiped her eyes and looked at me with something approaching respect. You're not at all what I thought you were. People rarely are. That's why assumptions are dangerous. That evening, I hosted the most awkward dinner party of my life. Michael, Vanessa, Richard, Linda, and I all crowded into my modest dining room, surrounded by furniture that Richard kept eyeing with confusion, as if he couldn't reconcile the cheap IKEA table with the business proposal I'd given his daughter. I don't understand, Richard said, for what felt like the 100th time. If you're actually worth $15 million, Why do you live like this?" "Like what?" I asked, serving pot roast from a Dutch oven I'd owned for 30 years. "Like someone who shops at discount stores and drives a 10-year-old Toyota." "Because I do shop at discount stores and drive a 10-year-old Toyota. The car runs fine, the furniture is comfortable, and I'd rather invest in property than clothes I'll wear twice." Not everyone measures success by how ostentatiously they can spend money. Michael had been quiet through most of the dinner, watching me with a mixture of confusion and something that might have been awe. Now he spoke up. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me?" "About the money, the properties, all of it?" I set down my serving spoon and looked at my son, my beautiful, successful son who I'd raised to value education and integrity over wealth. "Because I didn't want you to grow up entitled. I wanted you to understand what it meant to work for something, to build something with your own hands. If I'd raised you in a mansion, sent you to private schools, given you everything you wanted, you might have turned out very differently. You could have told me after I graduated, after I got my job. I could have. But by then, I'd been hiding it for so long that it felt easier to just keep going. And honestly, Michael, I liked being able to see how people really felt about me. When they thought I was just a building manager, they treated me a certain way. It was educational. It was manipulative," Linda said sharply. "You let us think you were poor. I let you think what you wanted to think. There's a difference. I never claimed to be struggling. You just assumed it because I didn't perform wealth the way you expected." "But why help us now?" Richard asked. "After everything that happened, why give us this restructuring plan?" I looked around my table at these 4 people who represented my family's future. Flawed, complicated, capable of both cruelty and growth. Because Michael is going to marry Vanessa in 4 months, and I'd rather attend that wedding as part of a functional, honest family than watch from a distance while everyone harbors resentment and hurt feelings. And because, despite the terrible first impression you all made, I think you're capable of learning and changing." Vanessa had been silent through most of the meal, but now she spoke up. "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you something. Tell all of you something." She looked at Michael. "I lied about what happened at the bridal shower." What followed was the most honest conversation I'd witnessed since this whole situation began. Vanessa explained what had really happened, why she'd made the choices she made, and how she'd tried to minimize it when talking to Michael. To his credit, my son listened without interrupting, though I could see the hurt and anger warring on his face. "Why would you do that to my mother?" he asked when she finished. "Because in that moment, I cared more about impressing my friends than about your family. And because I've spent my whole life in circles where people like your mother are invisible unless they're serving you something, I didn't think she mattered enough to correct the mistake." The honesty was brutal but necessary. Michael looked at his fiancée like he was seeing her for the first time. "I don't know if I can marry someone who thinks like that." "I don't think like that anymore," Vanessa said quietly. "Or at least, I'm trying not to. Your mother just offered to save my family's business after I humiliated her in front of 30 people. That's taught me more about character and grace than anything my parents ever modeled for me." "We did our best," Linda protested weakly. "You taught me that money and status were the most important things in life," Vanessa said. "You taught me that people who had less were less. And you taught me that appearances mattered more than substance." "Your best wasn't very good, Mom." The silence that followed was profound. I watched this family dismantle years of dysfunction right there in my dining room, and I realized that maybe my intervention had been about more than just teaching Vanessa a lesson. "So what happens now?" Michael asked, looking at me. "Now we decide, as a family, how we want to move forward. I'm offering your future in-laws a way to save their business, but that help comes with the understanding that our relationship needs to be built on mutual respect. No more assumptions about worth based on zip codes or job titles. No more casual cruelty disguised as jokes. No more measuring people by their bank accounts." "And if we can't do that?" Richard asked. "Then you figure out your financial problems on your own, and Michael and Vanessa decide whether they want to get married with half the family not speaking to the other half." 3 months later, I stood in a small community center in Ravenswood, watching my son marry Vanessa Chen in a ceremony that looked nothing like what she'd originally planned. Instead of the lavish country club wedding with 300 guests and a designer dress that cost more than my first car, they'd opted for something smaller and more meaningful. 60 people filled the space, friends and family who actually knew and loved them rather than society connections who needed to be impressed. Vanessa wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit. The flowers came from the farmer's market, and the reception was catered by a local restaurant that Richard's restructured business had helped find space for. As I watched them exchange vows, I thought about the conversation we'd all had the week before, when Vanessa had asked why I'd chosen to help them instead of just destroying them. Because revenge is empty, I'd told her. Justice is about setting things right, about creating opportunities for people to be better. I could have used my power to punish you for humiliating me, and maybe that would have felt good for a moment. But teaching you to be better, helping your family survive their crisis while learning important lessons about humility and respect, that feels like actually accomplishing something meaningful. Now, watching Michael kiss his bride while both families cheered, I felt the satisfaction of knowing I'd made the right choice. The hard choice, certainly, and the complicated one, but the right one. At the reception, Vanessa pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for saving my parents' business, for teaching me to be better, for still coming to the wedding even after everything. You're welcome. But Vanessa, you need to understand something. This isn't the end of learning to be better. It's the beginning. Every day, you're going to have to choose between the easy path of judging people by surface appearances and the harder path of treating everyone with respect, regardless of their perceived status. Marriage is going to give you lots of opportunities to practice. I know. But I have a pretty good teacher now." As I danced with Michael later that evening, he pulled me close and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't believe you about what happened at the bridal shower. I should have trusted you. You believed the person you loved. That's natural. I'm just glad we all found our way to the truth eventually." "Mom, can I ask you something? When did you decide to help them instead of destroying them?" I thought about that moment in the coffee shop when Vanessa had cried and admitted the truth about why she'd humiliated me. The moment when I'd recognized that underneath the entitlement and casual cruelty was a young woman capable of growth. The moment I realized that being right isn't as important as being kind, and that sometimes the best revenge is proving you were never what people assumed you were. You were just underestimated. 6 months after the wedding, I got a letter from Linda Chen. Inside was a check for the difference between market rate and what I was actually charging them for their new office space, along with a note, "Catherine, we can afford market rate now. Thank you for giving us the breathing room to restructure, but we don't need charity anymore. Also, thank you for teaching my daughter to be better than I was. She volunteers at a homeless shelter now, and last week she told me that people's worth has nothing to do with their bank accounts. I don't know where she learned that, but I'm grateful she did. You're the mother-in-law I wish I'd had, and the woman I wish I'd been." I framed that letter and hung it in my office, right next to my property deeds and business licenses. Not because it represented financial success, but because it represented something more valuable. The knowledge that money, power, and status are just tools. What matters is how you use them. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't destroying your enemies. It's teaching them to be better and discovering that underneath the surface assumptions and casual cruelty, everyone is capable of growth if you give them the right motivation. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.